Okay, good morning. My name is Ria. I'm a compulsive overeater and bulimic. Good to have everybody here. Today's topic is sponsorship. So before we even get into how to sponsor or what to look for in a sponsor, I want to define what a sponsor is. Um, because I've found in my own experience and hearing from other people, there's sometimes some gray area and confusion there. So ideally, when Bill Wilson and the first 100 alcoholics started this program, sponsors were people who had had a spiritual experience who showed other people how to have that spiritual experience. That's literally the point. So, in my opinion, a sponsor is someone who has experience working the 12 steps, who has a period of abstinence that has enabled them to have that experience by working the 12 steps, has experience to share, and will help guide a person to having that experience for themselves. Okay, so in other words, a sponsor is somebody who is working a 12-step program, who is abstinent, working a 12-step program, and has experience to share. A sponsor is not a therapist, a parent, a banker, wow, my brain just blanked. But anyway, a sponsor is nothing but that. They're not, a coach. They're not someone that you just whine to. They're not even your friend. Like the truth is, there are sponsors who can be friends with their sponsees. I'm luckily happen to be one of them, but you don't have to be friends with your sponsor or sponsee. That's not a requirement. Only that a sponsor is somebody who has experience with the 12 steps, who has abstinence, and has experience to share. So that doesn't mean, by the way, that credits transfer from years before. For example, if someone came to me and said, if I asked somebody, hey, can you tell me a bit about your program? And they say to me, well, I was in OA 20 years ago. I had 10 years of abstinence and I worked the 12 steps. I haven't been abstinent in about 10 years, but I do have that experience. That's not, I would swipe left because we're talking current now. Just like somebody like if, and oh, by the way, that's also important to mention. It's experience in OA. If I want an OA sponsor, I'm not going to ask someone in AA or NA or any of those fellowships to be my OA sponsor. If I am in those other fellowships and I want to ask one of them to sponsor me in that fellowship, by all means. But if I want to work an OA program, I need a sponsor who is in OA. Okay. I know that seems self-explanatory, but you'd be amazed at a lot of the things that I've come across over the years. Okay, what a sponsee is somebody who is interested and willing to get the experience the sponsor has to offer. That in regards to the 12 steps and living a spiritual life. Okay. A sponsee is not a chance to relive raising your children and try to do it better. It's not a partner. It's not a bestie. It's not, they're not your sponsor. They're not anything except somebody with whom a sponsor shares their experience. Now, to be a sponsor, to be a sponsor is the antithesis of our disease, right? Because for me, I want what I want. I want to be left alone. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to be inconvenienced. So when I have somebody who's literally calling me and interrupting my day to ask me for something that I'm giving to them with no expectation of return, that's the antithesis of my disease. But I was just reading yesterday in the big book that they gave the example of the miner whose belt is down to the last loop and they strike gold. And the only way they can keep their treasure is by continuing to mine it and giving away all of it. So I need to be a sponsor. I have to be willing to be inconvenienced and to give things away, share my experience without getting anything back. Ironically, I get everything back, but I have to be willing to go out of forget about myself. It's also important for sponsors to be aware of a few things. Number one, I don't have to say yes to everyone who asks. This is a big thing I hear a lot from people. If somebody asks me to do service, I have to say yes. I actually don't agree with that because I also have to be realistic about the responsibilities I have. There's a tendency in a lot of addicts and particularly overeaters, because we're women. I shouldn't say we're all women. There are obviously a lot of men in here, but primarily for women, we have an inclination to help, to support, to do more, to take on more. Sometimes that's actually our disease in action. I have at present one sponsee. I take on one sponsee at a time. The reason for that is because number one, they need my attention. And number two, I have 5 children and I have a husband and I have a job and I have a house and I have a program. And to work my program, I consider it a full-time job, aside from all my other jobs that I have to do. So I can't just take on everybody who asks and the way that I know that is because I end up resentful. And that's not their fault. That's my fault for doing too much. So a sponsor has to be honest about what they can and can't take on. And I've taken people on and then had to let them go, not because of them, because of me. And that's not fair. So that's a responsibility. I don't believe that you should take on every single person who asks. Also, because there are people who ask and they want what I have to offer, but they don't actually want to do that. Or they're not necessarily willing. Because by the way, that's the one thing I can give a sponsee every single experience that I have. I can go through the big book with them and tell them every single thing that I know. I can share, I can talk to them about food plans and how best to help them figure out how to eat. I can give them every single tool in my arsenal, but the one thing I cannot give them is willingness. I cannot. I cannot do that for them. And so there are people who are in touch with me and ask me for help, but they're not actually willing. And it's the responsibility of a sponsor and a sponsee to interview each other to find out if it's a good match. So let's talk a little bit about a sponsor interview versus a sponsee interview, okay? So let's start with the sponsee interview. Sponsee interviews are actually a little bit easier. There's only a few parts to it. First of all, a sponsee, when looking for a sponsor, you're not looking for someone who looks good. It's very appealing to find someone who looks really good. If it looks good, it is good kind of a thing. Not true. So number one, let's not let looks sway us, okay? Because I was extremely thin and talked a big game, but I would eat you alive. So I probably was not a very good sponsor. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. What you want is to find someone who is speaking when you ask someone about what they have to offer, do not ask them about their length of abstinence. You can, but it's irrelevant. Ask them about their experience. Ask them about their experience with the 12 steps and ask them about their relationship with God. If they answer you with experience and confidence, this is somebody you want to talk to. If they do not, or they have nothing to offer in that regard, or if they're just not comfortable with the topic, they can't help you. Because remember, the point of this program is to work the 12 steps and have a spiritual experience, like it says in step 12, which is going to solve all of our problems. If they don't have experience with that, if they have not started developing a relationship with a power that's greater than themselves, they are not going to be an effective sponsor. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there who can help with outreach or, giving insight into how they eat or something like that. But there's only so much a person can only give what they have, right? So like you want to call people and ask them, are you abstinent? Have you worked the 12 steps? Please tell me about your relationship with God. If everything in those categories work, ask them what their availability is. And if your times work out, excellent. It's very simple. Do you have what I want? So, I should be frank here that sometimes I know when I was a sponsee, I didn't necessarily want what the sponsor had, or I should say I wanted what they had, but I didn't want to do what they did. So, and I wasn't necessarily in the beginning so interested in a relationship with a higher power. Quite frankly, I wanted nothing to do with God. So at first, I went to people who had thin bodies and who had the kind of lives I wanted, which was they were married and had kids and had like things going on. And those people taught me how to eat. They taught me how to have a food plan and to weigh and measure my food, which I did for a long time. I don't do anymore, but at the time it was very important for me to do. After 2 years, I found myself outgrowing that relationship because I was thin at that point. What else do you have to offer besides teaching me how to eat? You know, once I have that down pat, I'm going to need more because if I don't remember, we've talked about this in this group before for those who haven't heard. In the doctor's opinion, in the big book, there's one sentence which I feel is the most important sentence in the book. He describes the alcoholic and says they are restless, irritable, and discontent unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort that comes by taking a few drinks. Right? So essentially, my disease is not the fact that I'm taking a few drinks. It's the fact that I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm using the drinks to quell and get myself ease and comfort so I'm not restless, irritable, and discontent anymore. When I take the alcohol away or the food away, now I'm just stuck being restless, irritable, and discontent. So my experience was I got thin and the food was down, but there was nothing helping me with the restless, irritable, and discontent. So I was thin, but I was very, very sick. And these people, God bless them, because they really did help me in the beginning. But when it came to working the 12 steps, when it came to talking about God, they had nothing to offer. So I had to move on because I had moved on to the next stage of my recovery. And again, check in with yourself and be willing to acknowledge where you really are. Are you looking for someone to teach you how to eat? Great. You can go talk to somebody. But I promise you that if you do not work the 12 steps, if you do not work a program of recovery, you might lose weight in the beginning, but you're going to be very emotionally uncomfortable. That's just how it goes. Because if I qualify to be in this room, that means I'm a compulsive overeater, which means that I am not comfortable when not using. You may not be like that, but if you're like me, that's how it's going to go. For a sponsor, it's a little more complicated, right? Because we addicts are very good liars. We're very good manipulators because a lot of the time we're lying to ourselves too. So we genuinely believe what we're telling you. We genuinely believe what we're saying, which is, I really want this. I really want to do this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm desperate. I'm done, you know? I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from people. And in that moment, I think they really mean it. The problem is not everybody's admitted their powerlessness yet. So yeah, in this moment, when I'm suffering the consequences of a binge, for sure, I'm done. It sucks. But, you know, an hour, 2 hours later, the next morning when I'm feeling, you know, bright and sunny again, I got this. I'm okay. So really, the best thing a sponsor can do in an interview is listen and then talk. Don't talk and then listen. Because listening to the sponsor, listening to the potential sponsee will give you an idea of whether or not they're ready to take what you have to offer. So I always start with, tell me what you're looking for. You know, tell me about your experience so far in this program. Because where they are will tell you what you have to offer. Now, at this stage in my personal recovery, I do not take on newcomers because I work with people specifically specializing in the 12 steps. And in order to work the 12 steps, a person has to be separated from food. So I always recommend, and I'm not recommending this for you. I'm just saying that this is for me because there are a lot of people who are available to work with newcomers and help them with the food piece. This is just my experience. However, no matter, even before when I sponsored, I always recommended that they find a food plan, someone they can commit their food to, and start doing that because we have to be separated from the drug before the 12 steps can take effect. So, yeah. Sorry, my brain is like really out of it today. So before the 12 steps can take effect. So if someone comes to me and says, I don't even know what I'm doing here, I'm going to say, excellent. This is what's recommended for people who are new to this program. I highly recommend that you find someone who can help you with that and then go from there. If you are somebody who's willing to work with newcomers, that's great. You are infinitely more patient than I am. because I am not. Um, it's it's just what it is. Um, Another thing that's important for sponsors to listen out for is desperation. Because if someone's really desperate, that's the perfect time to strike. But it's your responsibility to be very clear about what your expectations are. Because if you're wishy-washy in the beginning, then and then you come up with your boundaries later, it's going to be much harder. That's why when people come to me and they say, I want your help, I say, okay, I need you to do A, B, and C. And when you're done with that, come back to me and I'll be ready to help you. And it's find a food sponsor, find a food plan. I always recommend consulting with a nutritionist or food professional, because for a long time I told people how to eat, and that was really dangerous. We'll get to that in a minute. Um, and then once you have 3 days of abstinence, read the first 164 pages of the big book and then call me. You know how many people actually call me back? I'd say out of 100, one. But that one person is the person I want to work with because they're willing. Now, I have no judgment against the other 99 people. They're just not willing yet, and I can't give them the willingness. I've had people who have called me and I didn't hear from them, and then they call me back 6 months later. And that's fine because they had to get the willingness. But once they call me back and say, I'm willing, let's go. Um, let's talk about sponsors and food plans, okay? I am not qualified to tell any other person on this planet what they should be eating. I'm not even qualified to tell myself what I should be eating because if I was, I wouldn't be in this program. So I highly, highly, highly recommend consulting with professionals when figuring out food plans and recommending that sponsees do the same. For a long time, like very long time, I believe strongly that sponsees should eat the way I do and do what I do. I don't eat flour or, excuse me, white flour or sugar. And I weighed and measured every single piece of food that went into my mouth. And it worked for me. It worked for me for a long, long time. And the truth is, it probably would still work. But I've just evolved a little bit. That said, I would not take on a sponsee, or when I took on a sponsee, I always had in the back of my mind, the goal was eventually to get them to do that too, because that was abstinence for me. That's what abstinence looks like. And if they're not doing that, then it's not abstinent. So I was mistaken in that approach, and I probably owe amends to a lot of people about that. But really, I cannot tell somebody else what's honestly okay for them. I can make my recommendations and tell them what I do. But for example, I have a sponsee who eats things that I for sure can't eat. But it's not my job to tell her not to. I can ask her why she's eating them, and why at this time of day, why do you feel like what's the motivation behind eating it? For example, if somebody tells me they're going to have like cookies or something, so it's my opinion only, does not go for OA, that like nobody eats cookies for nutritional value. People eat cookies for an effect. So if someone is in this program and they say, I'm going to eat cookies, I'm going to say, okay, tell me about that. Tell me why. Like what is it that the cookies are? Like, are they part of a meal? Are they just something you're having as a snack? And I know someone who said to me, like, they eat cake because they used to go to parties and be resentful that they didn't eat cake and then come home and binge. And in my opinion, it's that, okay, so the cake is not really the issue here. The issue is that there's a lack of acceptance of powerlessness. Because if I really accepted that, I would just say, okay, this is just not something I can have. There's still a sense of tug of war about it's not fair that I can't have. Now, again, if this person wants to eat cake, wants to have their cake and eat it too, I'm not going to tell them not to. But it's my responsibility as a sponsor to just ask and encourage. That's it. Because people need to be held accountable. And again, I know people who eat, I don't eat bread. Bread is crack for me. Okay. I know people who have sandwiches and like every day and they have their, and it's not a big deal. I can't tell them not to. If an anorexic came to me and I told her to weigh and measure her food, I'd be signing her death warrant. That's really dangerous. She probably knows more about weighing and measuring food than I do after doing it for 20 years. As a bulimic, I I have to be really careful about the amount of food that I eat. If I feel too full, it can be very triggering for me. So these are subtleties that every person needs to determine for themselves. But as I said, I'm not here to tell people how to eat. I'm here to tell them how to work the steps. If somebody wants to work with if somebody wants a food plan and doesn't know where to start, there are recommendations. There is Dignity of Choice. There is the pamphlet with a few different suggested food plans. But I look at those as working drafts. Like if I look at a food plan and there are things in it, for example, if I feel like there's too much or too little, like as long as I'm open and communicative with my sponsor about it and I have a set food plan, like that's it. That's the end. Um, so I want to talk a little bit also about like the role of sponsors in daily life because there can be a little bit of a gray area, both on the part of the sponsor and the sponsee. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I was like when I first started sponsoring. Okay. So as I said, I got involved with these people who were really into weighing and measuring their food and weighing, measuring their bodies and food plans and genuflecting at the altar of the scale, et cetera. So when I started sponsoring, I did the same thing. And I had my sponsees, commit to a food plan that was similar to mine or work toward a food plan that was similar to mine. And I assumed in my head that because I was more abstinent or abstinent longer than these people, that I knew what they should do with their lives. So, for example, at 24 years old, I had a sponsee who was in her late 30s, early 40s, and she had a son who was getting into trouble, like could be sent to juvenile hall kind of trouble. And I felt it was my job to give her advice about what to do with her son. As a sponsor, that's totally inappropriate. Number one, I have no business giving advice to anyone because I barely know how to run my own life. That's number one. Number two, my job as a sponsor is to introduce my sponsees to their higher power and then let them go off into the sunset together. If I'm giving advice and telling my sponsees what to do, I'm placing myself in the position of their higher power. Now, I had a sponsor in the beginning when I first got abstinent who I made my higher power. I couldn't make a decision without talking to her. I had to check in about everything with her. And it was inevitable that that relationship would implode because I'm dealing with a human person. And no person can be my higher power. I had somebody say to me once, "You're the only thing standing between me and a binge." And I said, "That's really dangerous for you because I'm just a person. I can't be your God. God needs to be the one who you're working with, who's standing between you and the food, not me, because I guarantee you I will do something that will disappoint you or piss you off. And what then?" So my job when a sponsee reaches out to me with something going on in their lives, my husband, my kids, my this, my job, first of all, is to listen to them, to be a receptacle, to listen for the selfishness, self-seeking, and dishonesty and fear, to bring their attention to it, and then encourage them to go take it to their higher power and await instructions. Now, if they ask me for feedback and they want, my thoughts on it, I can give them, but I can give it with no expectation that they're going to follow anything that I say. There have been so many times that I've lovingly offered advice when really I'm like, just if you did what I said, then your life would be fine, But really, what do I know? What do I know? So at the end of the day, my job always is to redirect them back to the higher power, redirect them. Because as addicts, I had a friend, I've said this in this meeting before, I had a very good friend in this program who passed away. And she used to say that when I admitted my powerlessness, I threw in the towel. And then I spent the rest of my life trying to pull it back. And, we forget about that engagement and that relationship. I've had very deep and profound spiritual experiences, and I still forget to ask God for help with things. I still try to figure them out myself because that's my instinct. But as a sponsor, my job is to take someone through the steps, to teach them and introduce them how to engage with their higher power. And then when they forget, to be like, higher power's over there. Go talk to him or her, not me. I'm just a person. I'm here to help and support and love, but ultimately, like, that's where you're going to get your answers. It says in the big book, to find God, the desire must come from within. And like I said, I cannot make anybody want this. I can't make anybody want to get abstinent. I can't make anybody want to engage with a higher power. And I certainly can't give anyone a spiritual experience. I can share my experience, but it will never be your experience, ever. Your experience is like 1 second of your experience is infinitely more valuable than hours and hours and hours of listening to me. So my job is to encourage you to go out there and get your experience. As for sponsees, your sponsor is not here to save you. They're not going to save you. They're not going to save you from yourself. They're not there to give you permission or tell you you're being a good girl or a boy. That's not their job. They're supposed to call you out on stuff. I've heard someone say before that if I don't, a sponsor said to me once, if I don't end up on your 4th-step resentment list, I'm not doing my job right. So if I'm going to my sponsor and expecting to be coddled all the time, especially when I'm full of shit, then I'm not serving myself, and the sponsor that I have is not serving me if they do that. I'm lucky because I have a very loving sponsor, but she's also not afraid to be like, hearing some garbage right now, or like, let's focus on the gratitude here, or, and I'm just like, fuck you. But, a sponsor is not here to enable me to do the stuff that got me here in the first place. I recently had an experience where a sponsee picked up and they got in touch with me and they said, let's talk about the repercussions. That word was so interesting to me because I know there are so many dynamics in this program between sponsors and sponsees, and are they going to fire me and I'm firing my sponsor and this. First of all, can we please throw out the word fire? Because like, this isn't a job that you applied for and like you're getting paid for. Like, that's not what this is. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. I'm just turning on the light. Ugh, a little overcast today. Of course, I plugged in my printer. Okay, fine, whatever. Anyway, so there's no firing anyone, okay? We are agreeing to go on a spiritual journey and walk alongside each other for a while. Maybe it will be a long trip. Maybe it will be a short trip. Who knows? We're just making an agreement together to explore something, okay? We're just partners walking along on a path together. So I've walked this path. I'm a little further up the path than you, so I can show you which way to go. But ultimately, our paths may split, and that's okay. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. It just means that your path and my path are going in different directions. It's not personal. However, when this sponsee asked me about repercussions, I was like, I assume you mean some kind of punishment? Well, number one, if anything, you probably punished yourself way more than I ever could. That's number one. Number two, if somebody picks up, right? It says in the book, bottles are but a symptom. So if somebody picks up, that's actually a great indicator that there's more spiritual work to be done. So instead of saying, as your sponsor, I need to let you go now that you picked up, tell me about what happened before you picked up. Now, if what a sponsor needs to listen for is willingness. That's the bottom line. How willing is the sponsee? So if a sponsee is working their tail off, doing the 12 steps, and they have a slip, and they come to me and they say, listen, I had this slip, but I'm like ready to double back and go back and tell me what to do, and I'll do the work, and I don't want this to happen again. Let's keep going. If a sponsee comes to me and says, yeah, well, I wasn't really working the program and I slipped, and I say, okay, well, I would recommend maybe going back and finishing your amends, or, getting on that 4th step because you dropped the ball on that. And they're like, yeah, then our paths are diverging. Not because I'm punishing, but because there are people who are super willing to do it who want my time. My time and your time as a sponsor is valuable. because you have experience to share with people who want it. If there's somebody who wants to want what you have, but they're not willing to do what you recommend, then your time is not for them. That sounds harsh, but you're actually doing them a favor. Because if I stick around waiting for somebody who's not willing to get willing, there's somebody else over there who is so willing and really needs help who's not getting it. And the other person, without my help, might hit some kind of bottom that will make them willing. And they're, and it's not easy, but I always make it about me helping them because it's true. If somebody is if we're working together and somebody keeps picking up and picking up and picking up and picking up, I'm clearly not helping them. It's not about them, it's about me. If what I'm offering you is not helping you, then you probably need to find someone who will help you. It's not a punishment, it's not a repercussion. It's I'm giving you what I have and it's not serving, so let's come up with a plan B. So there's that. I'm thinking of some other sponsee things. Right. So I also have to, as a sponsor and a sponsee, have to be aware that my sponsor or my sponsee may not work a program exactly like I do. They may not eat the way I do. They may not go to the same meetings I do. That is okay. The bottom line here is willingness and communication. Lots of sponsors work in lots of different ways. I know somebody who talks to their sponsees one day a month. She has a date with them and they talk on the phone one time a month. For me personally, that would totally not work, both as a sponsor and a sponsee, because I like to have a relationship with my sponsor and my sponsees. I call my sponsor every day. Do I talk to her every day? No, because we're both busy women and we kind of do our thing. But like I talk to my sponsor, I'd say at least 4 times a week, 3, 4 times a week. And my sponsee checks in with me every day. She sends me her food every day. Now, remember, I didn't ask her to send me my food. She chose to send me her food, but that's an option for her if it's something that works for her. I do not demand anything except that my sponsees work the 12 steps. That's it. So she sends me her food and she calls me once a day. We don't always connect, but we talk, again, 3, 4 times a week. Probably more because we actually live local, so we talk a lot. But the point is, this is a working relationship, right? And it's just like a relationship with a higher power. If I have somebody that I'm in a relationship with, but I only talk to them occasionally, or I just send them a voice note when I remember they exist, the relationship's not going to be so rich, right? And the better I get to know my sponsor or my sponsee, the more effective the relationship's going to be. I've been working with my sponsor now for almost 2 years, and she knows me pretty well at this point. And she knows the things that come up over and over and over again. And so, but when I call her with them, she says, "Oh, okay, so I'm hearing that thing that we talk about over and over and over again. So what's worked for you in the past?" And then I go and do that thing, and then that's it. For somebody who I've only talked to, here and there, it's like working with it's like meeting a new person. I have to tell the whole story again. And when I get to tell the story, I get to tell the story the way I want to tell the story. So that's not always, the clear, honest version. So I really believe strongly in having a relationship with and developing a relationship with the sponsor. Now, as I said, it doesn't have to be a friendship. If you're lucky, it usually turns out to be one, but it doesn't have to be. As long as you feel like safe and supported by your sponsor, even if it's a tough love sponsor, they don't have to be your friend. You just have to have what they want. And right. So a few other things that are my personal guidelines. I do not demand or think that everybody has to do everything that I do, but these are my recommendations. I don't sponsor men, even gay men. I have them in my fellowship, but I don't sponsor them. It was recommended to me by the people who taught me the 12 steps many, many years ago that women sponsor women and men sponsor men. The reason is because there are a few reasons. One is that we have a unique experience as women that other women can relate to. There are things we talk about that men may not understand, and it's easier to speak with a woman about them. The other piece is that relationships between a sponsor and sponsee can become very intimate. You share things with them that you do not share with any other human on earth. To do that with a member of the opposite sex, or if you're gay, someone, even someone who you're attracted to, it's very important to be careful who you choose. But with the member of the opposite sex, there can be develop an intimacy there that may veer into something inappropriate. For example, I had a sponsor who took me through the steps, and she worked a really strong program. And then I ended up going and working with somebody else later, not because of anything, just time and whatever. And later I found out that she took on a sponsor in our big book group who was male, and they ended up having an affair. That almost destroyed both of their marriages. Now, is that going to happen every time? No. But do I need that complication in my life? No, I do not. Now, again, you don't have to do this. You can completely ignore what I'm saying and sponsor whoever you want. But that's just my experience. I also don't sponsor gay men because it's the same intimacy. Now, obviously, it would not turn into something sexual, but as a married woman, out of respect for my husband, I don't develop that kind of intimacy with other men, gay or straight. I do have a best friend who's gay, but that's a different story. But it's a different kind of friendship. But I highly, highly recommend just sticking with women, and men sponsoring men. And like I said, you don't have to agree with me. You could think that that's ridiculous and people can control themselves. You might be right, but I don't need to test it. I don't need to test the theory. Okay, I am looking through my notes now and seeing what else. Oh, right. Okay. So here's the bottom line. This is the line I really wanted to talk to. Okay. On page 98 in the chapter Working with Others, there's a really important line that I really want to read out loud. So sorry, I know I'm like all over the place today, but this is just what today is. This line is job or no job, wife or no wife, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence on God. That is the fundamental rule with sponsors and sponsees, right? No matter what a person's circumstances, they could be at the bottom of the barrel, homeless, living on the street, no job, hungry. They can still get better if they're willing. And no one's going to be able to do it for them except them and their higher power. I am not capable of fixing someone. And I think when I hear from sponsors, when I have friends who say to me, my sponsee picked up, and I just feel so guilty. I feel like a failure. And that's because that sponsor is assuming that they have the power to do it for this person. They cannot. Like I said, you cannot give anybody else willingness. Only they can find the willingness within themselves. If a sponsee picks up, you did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong. They're diseased. There are people with the disease. It's not a failure on either of your parts. This is just their experience. Sponsors have to work very hard not to take it personally when sponsees pick up or when they don't follow their advice. There are things that I've told sponsees to do, and they do the opposite. And they deal with the consequences of that. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes they, say, I really feel like this is right for me. And on paper, I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's such a good idea. And then they go and do it and it works out. And I'm like, okay, so I guess I'm not God, because what do I know? That's why my job is to just keep referring them back to the higher power, right? It's like, I'm sort of the triage at the hospital, right? Like they come into me and they're like, listen, my arm's bleeding. And I say, okay, great. Fill out this form and I'm going to send you to the surgeon. I'm not doing surgery on them. I am completely unqualified. I can just tell you that my arm was bleeding once and I went in there and they sewed it up for me and now it's better. So I'll just show you where to go down the hall. So that's really what this is. I cannot fix your arm for you, and I cannot make you want to fix your arm. You may say, you know what? I'm really busy today. I'm going to take my bleeding arm and I'm going to go grocery shopping and get my nails done. And maybe if my shoe fills up with blood and I feel like I can't drive my car, I'll come back to the hospital. That is your choice. You can come in a bloody mess if you want. I don't care. I don't care. It's not up to me. I can only tell you what I know. And the bottom line is, if you want to be an effective sponsor, you have to do what you recommend your sponsees do. I have to work a 12-step program. I have to maintain my relationship with my higher power. I have to stay abstinent because staying abstinent is the first, it's the prerequisite to working the steps. It's not the result of working the steps, okay? I have to take the drug away so that I can deal with the actual illness of alcoholism. Alcoholism is not the alcohol. It's the brain that makes me want to drink alcohol to make me feel better. So once I have experience with learning how to deal with that, of working the 12 steps, having a higher power, and then exercising that relationship to deal with life in real time, then I can help people. If I do not have experience with that, I do not have any business sponsoring people. And I'm saying this very clearly because I know people who have come into this program and they do not have recovery, but they think that they can sponsor people and they can't. And they end up causing a lot of damage because even though they may be really excited about program, and even if they feel like they've been abstinent for a little while, if you have no recovery, you're still sick, which means that you don't know how to have a relationship with other people yet or to help other people. Really, as I said before, I can only give what I have to give. And aside from going to a bunch of meetings and making some new friends, if I haven't worked the 12 steps, then I'm just going to like throw up my crazy on you. That's it. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. I just recently had to talk to somebody who, you know, was not was doing something like that. And I don't usually get involved in other people's programs, but I had heard from enough people who were like, yeah, this is not great. And I felt it was important to just say, like, I love that this person is so enthusiastic about recovery. So instead of, accumulating acolytes, use that enthusiasm to work a program of recovery. Get yourself a spiritual experience so you have something to give to these people. Because otherwise, you're just like making friends, which is great. It's a great byproduct of the program, but like, let's get serious. That's what this thing is. I think it's very difficult. It was difficult for me when I came in and I heard people talking about how to eat. Because once that is set aside, nobody taught me how to live. And I needed to learn how to live. And the only way I learned how to live was with this. And I needed to find people who knew how to do that. Because when I learned how to live with God as the center, the need for food goes away entirely. Because I don't have to drug myself because I'm not uncomfortable. Now, that's not to say that it's easy, okay? My life right now is really challenging. I live in a country that's at war. I have 5 children, like I mentioned, and all of them have their own specific needs. And I work and I'm married, which, those of you who are in longstanding monogamous relationships know that that's a full-time job. I say that like half joking. I actually adore my husband, but like, come on now. And I also work a program. And for me, this is my experience. I do not say this for anybody else. My experience is because I devote so much to my recovery, I don't really have the bandwidth to like go out and be like one of those ambitious career women. I know people can, I'm not. But the point is, I have dealt with a lot of life on life's terms in the last 22 years. I'm talking death, moves. I've had 3 babies, abstinent, raising kids abstinent. Like I said, marriage, weight loss, weight gain, relapse, coming back from relapse. The only major moving across the world, like the only major thing, thank God, that I have not dealt with in recovery is divorce. And God willing, I will never have to deal with that. But other than that, like that's what I have to share. That I have worked this program and I have learned a way to live that is God-centered, that enables me to sit in front of you today and share my experience. That's the point of this thing, to take what I have and then keep giving it away to other people. When someone comes to me and says, I want what you have, I say, okay, great. Are you ready to do what I do? If they're ready, excellent. If they're not, that's totally fine. Here are my recommendations. If you decide you are ready, come back. It's really as simple as that. So I'm going to stop because it's 10:46. And we'll do sharing. Thanks, guys.